Hello and welcome everybody. Today I would like to cover the position after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. The classical Italian game after bishop c5, and already we're working here on moves like b4, which leads to the Evans Gambit. And on the Gambit guide we also covered a bit move like c3, but this time I would like to pay your attention to quite rare but interesting continuation which many readers ask me to cover, which is a short castling, knight f6, and now d2, d4. So instead of d4, white usually could play here d3, which leads to the classical position of I would say Stanit setup, so which is quite popular from the Rai Lopez defense, and sometimes players are using the similar setup when playing the Italian game. So white is very slowly, quietly continue developing his pieces after c3, bishop b3, knight bd2, etc. Indeed, what I would like to show you, this is part of Italian Gambit. So the real Italian Gambit happened after immediate bishop c4, bishop c5 and d4, but I believe that the including of two moves, short castle, knight f6 and only now d4, just leads to very interesting and I would say complicated position. So here we already have some analysis, but for the first game I found in my database, it was played between Max Lange and Adolf Andersen, and already that game showed the great potential of white's attack in case black is captured, bishop takes d4. Indeed, I would like just with you to look at the options here. So first of all, after e takes d4, we are going to the classical Max Lange attack. After e4, e5, d5, which we already covered in our Gambit guide. So in case of bishop b6, this move cannot be recommended, since after d takes e5, black has to move his knight somewhere. Knight takes e4 and then queen d5 really leads to a very big problem for black. So black has to forget about the knight on e4, otherwise white is going to be checkmate black's king after queen takes f7. So of course bishop b6 cannot be recommended. So black could try playing in this position knight takes d4. In that case, after knight takes e5, lot of opportunity, lot of very dangerous opportunities for white in that case. So how to stop bishop takes f7? Short castling could be made by bishop e3, and the bishop is attacking the d4 knight. The move like queen e7 leads to the material loose. Takes, queen takes, c5, queen c3. So one of these lines happened in the game between Yakov Estrin, well-known Russian master, and Ravinsky, Leningrad, 1955. After knight takes e4, queen e3, somehow black is facing very big problems. Queen takes e5 and knight c3. The knight is pinned and it's going to be material advantage for white. In case after rook e8 and rook e1, otherwise just no pieces for black to hold the knight on e4. So as you can see already in the very early stage of the game, black is just facing a lot of troubles. So if instead of queen e7, black plays d5, after e takes d4, still not so clear how to save this knight on d4. b5, bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, b takes c4, knight c3, so other pawn is gone on c4. White is just simply 2 pawns up with no any compensation for black. So it remains only knight e6. In that case, after bishop takes e6, bishop takes e3, bishop takes f7, king h8, and bishop b3. White is just simply collecting another exchange after knight f7 check, and there is no way for black to survive here. After bishop b6, knight f7, rook takes f7, rook and bishop takes f7. White is just having exchange up, no much compensation for black. So another game, very short game, which shows great potential. The Italian's Gambit. So let's look at the standard position. So knight takes d4, extremely dangerous move. It means that black has no too much opportunities. So bishop takes d4 is the only serious move which we have to consider. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and let's look at the position. So white is having quite serious compensation for a sacrificed pawn. What is this compensation? We have much better pieces development, so we already castle. The position of knight on d4 cannot be called the so good one, since white always could attack this knight, or immediately by playing f4, or after bishop g5, threatening a4, just to challenge the black's e5 pawn later on. Look at what could happen after h6. Bishop h4 and g5. White comes here with great move. f4, breaking through black's position on the king side. G takes f4. Rook takes f4, sacrificing the full rook. Now after e takes f4 and queen takes d4, black is in very bad situation. So they have probably already losing position. So white is intending bishop takes f6, white is intending queen e5. After c5, white could play simply queen c3 and still keeping all the threats. Position is very unpleasant. After rook g8, bishop takes f6 and c5, simply queen e5, finish the game immediately. So what else? E takes f4, in this position queen takes d4, and once again black is in losing situation already. There is no way to cover the f7 pawn. Knight cannot go, because rook on h8 is hanging. So, already we can sum up the position after f4 that black in the very dangerous situation. G takes h4 also doesn't work. After f takes e5, both black's knights are under attack and the game cannot be solved anymore. Okay, let's back. So other quite strong move in such situation is f4. d6, and in that case f takes e5, d takes e5, and once again after bishop g5, white is keeping very long pressure, quite long pressure for black position on the king side. Despite the fact white is having the pawn down, there's plenty of compensation, and we can look at some games, of course. So first of all, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, castling short side, knight f6, d4, in the blitz game between Vladislav Tkachov and Pavel Ulyanov happened. Bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, f4, d6. So you can ask why is playing f4 and not bishop g5. The problem is that after h6, bishop h4, black is not forced to play g5 immediately. So black could start with d6 move and then bishop e6. So in case we are playing f4 instantly, so black must protect the pawn after d6 and capturing and bishop g5. So in case of h6 we already capture on f6, creating black too many problems on the king side, so just demolishing positions there. Bishop e6, knight a3, h6, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, c3, knight c6, queen f3. So already we can see that there is nothing special black can do against queen takes f6, and this the resulting position after queen takes f6, definitely white is keeping slight but long-term advantage, positional advantage, because black is having a lot of weaknesses on the king side. So this is quite interesting, quite, I would say, modern way of playing Gambit. So when white is not trying to checkmate black's king, so white is trying just to play for slightly better endgame or slightly better position in the middle game, better pawn structure, more easy development of the pieces. So white is of course also intending to come with rook to d1 first, and only then to capture on f6. Queen e7. So clear that after queen takes f6, the black's position is worse. For instance, queen takes f6, rook takes f6, king e7. So second rook comes to f1. White is intending bishop takes e6 and then rook f7. After capturing and rook to f8, knight e3, black is having a lot of troubles. So white is also intending knight d5, also intending maybe to move the rook away, also intending knight g4, attacking this pawn on h6, also intending immediately rook takes h6 and then knight f5, threatening the f5 square, d5 square, so white's knight just can do the perfect outpost on e3. So, in the blitz game which we follow, Tkachov against Elyanov, then unfortunately Elyanov here decided to capture on c4 and completely overlooks it after queen takes h8. White is winning instantly. Okay, so for having just slightly more, I would say, historical overview, let's look at the game which played in 1859 between Max Langen and Adolf Andersen, where we see quite similar ideas. So when even black is trying to play the best way, I would say, still he has to solve a lot of different problems. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, short castling, knight f6, and Max Lange played d4, inviting his famous opponent to take on d4 with a pawn, which leads to the Max Langer attack after e4, e5. But of course Adolf Andersen answered bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, f4, d6, f takes e5, d takes e5, bishop g5. So very interesting that we have almost more than almost 150 years since this game between Max Lange and Adolf Andersen played, and Tkachov and Elyanov, two very strong grandmaster, 2600, Elyanov even close to 2700, playing the similar line, quite rare line, but quite interesting line after 150 years. Bishop e6, and now, in case instead of just theoretically best according to this theory move knight a3, which we just looked from this Tkachov-Elyanov game, Max Lange played just most obvious way. He captured on f6, creating black double pawns, g takes f6, captured on e6. I believe in this position it was possible even to capture f takes e6 with the pawn, but Adolf Andersen captured with knight. So intending that after queen takes d8, rook takes d8, rook takes f6, and rook d1 check, the position becomes at least equal for black. But Max Lange just continue the positional pressure after knight c3, just completing his development and still keeping pressure over the f file. c6, covering the d5 square, but this allowing white already to go into the endgame, winning back the pawn after queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and rook takes f6. We are having quite similar endgame which we saw just a few minutes ago, when white is having long-term pressure and black has to survive. King e7, second rook came to f1, rook d to f8, and now Max Lange just showed his great endgame technique. G3, slowly improving his position. So this move has idea to prevent black's knight obtaining the f4 square. At the same time, white is intending now maybe to place the rook on h6 and continue with knight d1, knight d3, and it's the right moment to bring the knight to the key square f5. Rook h to g8, rook f5, f6, knight d1. So white always could meet knight d4 by playing rook h5 and then knight e3, also covering the c2 pawn, also aiming to send away the knight from the center after c3. So the position quite unpleasant for black already. White is playing, I would say, with 2 results in the pocket, so it's very, very difficult for black here to do anything. Now rook g4, so preventing white from playing knight e3 because pawn on e4 is hanging. So knight f2, white doesn't change his plan, just first need to improve the position a bit. Rook g6, knight d3, sends to better pawn structure, so white is having time for improving his position. a5, so don't forget in the end game to bring the king in the center. King g2, c5, b3, b5, knight b2, rook d8, and finally knight d1. So finally knight is coming to e3, and the new hole on d5. Black is trying his counterattack, but it's too late. Rook d4. Black is winning the pawn on e4, but lose all the pawns on the king's side after knight d5 check. King d6, knight xf6, rook e3, knight takes h7, rook g7, knight f6, and in this position Andersen just found any chance to continue the battle, so he just resigned because white is just threatening to exchange one of the rooks and bring knight back to e4, taking this key square. Also not so clear how to stop rook d1, and not telling that the main problem here for black that knight e8 is a threat. For instance, after a move like rook e7, white simply plays king f2, and another problem here, the rook on e3 is hanging and there is no any good square for this rook to go away. After rook c3, white is coming with the knights fork, knight e4 check, and all is done. So rook on c3 is gone, the game is over. So just quite fantastic technique by Max Lange against Adolf Andersen, played in almost 150 years ago. So you ask, so why nobody plays it? So I could tell you that even on quite high level, I saw a few games where similar lines were using, and Sergei Sissan played in Weekend 2009 game against Michael Adams, and won is quite I would say successfully in showing the quite similar plans. And even the next interesting game played in the Blitz between Sergei Sissan and Peter Leko I would like just to share with you my thoughts about the lines which both players were playing in. So, as you can see now that bishop takes d4 really is the main continuation. That's why maybe this line is not so popular, because I would say in the very best, white is only getting slightly better endgame. d4, bishop d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and f4. So Peter Lecker was just quite good prepared for this game and played d6. After f takes, d takes, bishop g5. He answered bishop e6. Knight a3. Queen e7. c3. So black also intended to play bishop queen c5 at the right moment. So c3 is necessary to send away the knight and just to prevent black from castling the long side. Bishop takes c4. Bishop takes f6. Important move, as we know. So white must demolish black's position on the king side and to create the strong outpost on f5 for his knight. G takes f6. Knight takes c4. Knight e6. So let's evaluate the position. White is having still pawn down, but his compensation is quite significant. One of the pawns on f6 on f7 will gone for sure, and black also has to spend time for finding the good square for his king, because it's quite dangerous for black to go for short castling. So long castling is the most obvious continuation, but right now it's not possible. Indeed, black is intending to play queen c5 check. Knight e3. Queen c5. Queen e1. Allowing black go for long castling, but after king h1, white is intending to play knight d5. White is intending to play rook takes f6. Knight f4. g3, rook d3, counter-attack, but doesn't matter much for white. Knight f5. So finally white's knight just achieved the great outpost on f5. After knight a6, queen e2, the position becomes very, very complicated. So white is intending queen h5, attack black's king side. Rook h to d8 leads to the position when white is winning exchange after knight d4. Look at that move. Overloading the d file. So Lecker decided to sacrifice, of course. Rook takes d4, c takes d4, e takes d4, which lead to very, very complicated position, but I believe that still, even here, white is slightly better after e4, e5. So today lesson we covered just quite rare a opening line, which I would call the side Italian Gambit, which is not so popular in the tournament practice. But if you would like just to test this line in your games, I guess just possible, and no need to be scared. So if you have any question for this variation, this according to the sources it's called Kaltanovsky Gambit in Italian game, so you're welcome to ask me. Thanks everybody for watching. So see you next time in the Gambit guide. And send me new questions. I will be happy to answer. Bye.